So, what is it that holds a nation of over 1 billion people together? You know, it's not just a shared history or culture, it's a single, powerful document. Today, we're going to dive into the Constitution of India, and not as some dusty old book on a shelf, but as the living, breathing rule book that shapes literally everything in modern India, from your personal rights to the government's power.
Everything, and I mean everything, starts with these 5 words. Just take a second to think about what that means. This isn't a command from a king or a law handed down from some colonial power. No, the very first line declares that the ultimate authority, the source of all this power, is the people. It's an incredible promise that the citizens of India made to themselves. So, what exactly is this thing? Well, the easiest way to think about it is like a computer's operating system. It sets all the rules for the entire framework: what the government can do, what it absolutely can't do, and maybe most importantly, the non-negotiable rights that every single citizen has. It is the final word. It's the rulebook that governs the governors themselves. All right, so before we get into the nitty-gritty, the specific rules of the system, we really need to understand its core philosophy. And that's all laid out right at the beginning, in the preamble, which pretty much acts as the Constitution's mission statement. This is the nation's founding promise. And this incredible vision was officially adopted on November 26, 1949. Just try to picture that moment for a second. After centuries of foreign rule, the representatives of the Indian people finally got to sit down and put on paper the blueprint for the kind of nation they wanted to build from the ground up. These 5 words you see here, they're basically the DNA of the Indian state. Let's break it down. Sovereign, India is its own boss. Socialist, the goal is social and economic equality for everyone. Secular, the state doesn't play favorites with religion. Democratic, the people choose their government. And republic, the head of state is elected, not a king or queen. Every single one of these was a very deliberate choice. So, what's the whole point of this new state? Well, the preamble promises to deliver 4 big things to every single citizen: justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity, which is really just a sense of brotherhood and unity. And look, these aren't just nice, fluffy words. They are the absolute pillars the entire nation is built on. That's a beautiful promise, right? But how does it become real? How does it become something you can actually use in your life? Well, that brings us to part 3 of the Constitution, the fundamental rights, the rights you can actually demand. These are called your fundamental rights. They're the core human rights guaranteed to every citizen. But here is the most important part, the real game changer. They are enforceable in a court of law. So what that means is, if any of these rights are violated, you have the power to go directly to court and demand they be upheld. They aren't just suggestions, they are solid guarantees. And these rights are huge. Article 14 means everyone is equal before the law. Article 19 protects your freedom of speech. And the famous Article 21, the right to life, has been interpreted by the courts over the years to include everything from the right to a clean environment to the right to privacy. See? These aren't just abstract ideas, they are very real, concrete protections. Okay, so if those are the rights the government must protect, what about the goals it should be working towards? What's on its long-term to-do list? For that, we've got to turn to part 4 of the Constitution. This slide shows a really crucial difference. Think of it this way. If fundamental rights are the hard and fast, legally binding rules of the game, then the directive principles are kind of like the spirit of the game guide. You can't sue the government for not achieving them tomorrow, but they act as the country's moral compass, the long-term goals every government is expected to aim for. And these goals really paint a picture of the kind of society India is trying to build. You know, things like the right to work and education, ensuring a living wage for workers, protecting the environment, and making sure the judiciary is totally separate from the government. They are the nation's North Star, guiding the whole journey. So we have rights and we have goals. The next logical question is, how is the government actually set up to deliver on all this? I mean, how does the machinery actually work? This is where we get into the real architecture of power. The architects of the Constitution were smart. They knew that putting too much power in one place was a dangerous idea. So their solution was to divide the government's functions into 3 distinct separate pillars. This creates a natural system of checks and balances. It's a pretty simple and elegant design when you break it down. You have the legislature, like the parliament, whose one job is to make the laws. Then you have the executive, the president and their ministers, whose job is to implement those laws. And finally, you have the judiciary, the court system, with the critical role of interpreting the laws and making sure they follow the Constitution. Make, implement, interpret. Simple. And this whole three-pillar structure isn't just for the national government in Delhi. India is a federal system, which means this entire design is mirrored at the state level too. So you have a central government with its legislature and executive, and then each state has its own version, creating yet another layer of distributed power. And that brings us full circle, right back to the powerful closing words of the preamble. This is maybe the most important reminder of all. This whole complex system, all the rights, all of the goals, all the powers, it wasn't forced on anyone. It was a system that the people of India chose, created, and gave to themselves. So, from the promise of equality for all to that careful balance of power, that is the core logic of India's rulebook. It's a truly incredible promise that was made way back in 1949. The real question for us today is, how well is that promise being kept? And how does this single document continue to shape your life right now?